History remembers what happened, but it is shaped by moments when everything could have turned another way. A decision, a journey, a single moment. This is where we explore them. When history turned. Have you ever charged a device and wondered if electricity could just feel invisible, abundant, and peaceful instead of noisy and political?
There is a woman on her balcony now, Maria, and she tilts a ceramic mug against sunlight that never seems to leave the city. Above the horizon, a thin collector array turns, invisible in daylight but constant at night. And through a small receiver on her roof, the apartment draws power without a meter spike or a delivery truck. She walks past, no smokestacks, no delivery vans for fuel, and the street's warmth and hum come from rooftop rectennas and wall panels, tuned to a common frequency. The city grid is mostly wireless and remarkably quiet. In shops, prices for electricity are low, and where you would expect gas stations, there are service hubs for drones and maintenance crews who calibrate orbital links. Insurance policies mention orbital debris, risk casually, like weather.
How did we get from our world of power plants and pipelines to that gentle, constant supply? What stopped the oil politics and made cities quiet?
The switch began very early and very deliberately. In that timeline, funding priorities in the 1960s favored a program combining microwave beaming experiments, lightweight thin-film photovoltaics, and a sustained heavy lift capacity. Public demonstrations in the late 1960s convinced regulators that beams could be safe if power density and fail-safes were regulated, and that acceptance unlocked mass deployment.
So when exactly did the fork happen? A single decision, a demonstration, a treaty? Was there a visible test that changed public opinion? Or was it a funding vote buried in a broader budget? Which technological hazard was solved early enough to make governments commit to orbital farms instead of more terrestrial plants? What I can add as context is this. In our history, space solar was an idea discussed in the late 1960s but remained theoretical because launch cost, transmission losses, and institutional risk kept it marginal. In that alternate line, three factors converged a few years earlier than in our reality-sustained political will to repurpose heavy-lift rockets toward civilian construction, an incremental but successful demonstration of microwave power transfer at scale, and a treaty framework that distributed orbital deployment responsibilities between multiple states and private partners. Those conditions reduced the perceived geopolitical risk and split the costs.
So the change in that era was not a single gadget. It was a policy pivot, a coordinated program starting in the mid-1960s that treated space-based solar as infrastructure rather than as an experimental curiosity. From that pivot, everything else unfolded differently. In the 1970s, that program built modular orbital platforms. The emphasis was on standard parts and launch cadence rather than monolithic ambitions, which made deployment faster and cheaper.
In the 1980s, energy geopolitics shifted. Oil exporters reoriented economies sooner. Investment flowed into export of processed materials and services instead of raw fuels, and many states used orbital power revenues to accelerate industrial diversification.
In the 1990s, the climate narrative changed. Decarbonization began as a geopolitical imperative rather than a distant policy, and the global carbon trajectory shows earlier flattening in sectors tied to electricity.
In the 2000s, distributed microgrids and rectenna networks became common in cities worldwide. Fossil fuel demand for power generation fell sharply, while liquid fuels remained for transport until longer-range electric solutions matured.
In the 2010s, energy innovation focused on orbital maintenance, resilience against space weather and debris mitigation. International regimes matured for orbital commons and liability sharing.
By the 20s, the lived experience is routine. Quiet cities, cheap baseload electricity, fewer resource-driven conflicts, and different industrial geography, where some nations rose by mastering launch, assembly, and long-term orbital logistics.
And today, comparing both realities, our world still carries the inertia of centralized fossil systems and geopolitical dependencies. The alternate world carries the legacy of large public investment in orbital infrastructure, a different set of technical risks, and social norms that treat energy as an ambient public utility.
If your question was whether electricity could feel invisible and peaceful instead of noisy and political, the answer is yes, but only because an early institutional choice treated orbital solar as long-term infrastructure, not as an impractical experiment. That single pivot rewired decades of investment, switched political incentives, and shifted conflict vectors away from fuel control toward logistics and orbital stewardship outcomes that answered your small, everyday question at the top of the episode.
If this wasn't the only timeline you'd like to visit, subscribe.